Okay, welcome everybody. Hey, say hi.
Hi, Lacy. Hi, everybody. So happy to be with you all today.
So this is Hope Ray. She is a fantastic woman. We've been chatting for the last little bit. She's a lot of fun. I think you guys will really enjoy spending a little bit of time with her and me this afternoon or whenever you're listening. So Hope is a licensed therapist, a CSAT therapist, which she'll explain a little bit about, and then a CHFP. So I'll let her kind of explain that and what she does in working with women and male partners. So go ahead, Hope, take it away. Tell us about you.
Sounds good. Well, I've had a blast already connecting with you, Lacy, and I think our hearts really resonate around not only helping women to recover from compulsive sexual behavior or serial relationships or affairs, but also to help their partners to overcome this, because so many relationships are really worth saving and can become so much stronger in the process. So we were chatting a bit about that and how our hearts really are geared up to offer resources and help. What I do as a certified sex addiction therapist and a certified hope and freedom practitioner is I offer intensives, and they're in the Detroit area in Michigan. And what will happen is I'll work with couples for 3 days individually. They fly in, and we work very exclusively on the specific issues they're facing in their relationship. I offer a few different kinds. I can happily tell you guys about those. But I've been doing this work for about 10 years now and really loving the experience I have now working with women who are really looking to get free from their compulsive loving or their sexual behavior that they feel is really out of control. So that's why I appreciate the work you're doing, Lacy, and all of you listening and participating. I think
Okay, I think we froze for a second, but I think we're good to go now.
Okay.
Thanks for that, Hope. That's awesome. And as we were talking about male partners and how little support there is out there for them. Mm-hmm. So let's kind of talk about that. Let's have that conversation again. So what do you see as the need for male partners? What do you see is out there? And what are some of your plans for the future?
Well, for male partners, one of the biggest hurdles that they face is there's a lack of support out there, not because there's a lack of men going through that experience, but because they don't really know where to turn, as you know. So what I find in my office is that they often really have a need for disclosure, just like a female partner would. They also have a need to kind of set a course of boundaries and a trajectory of healing for themselves. Nobody, whether it's a male or a female, wants to get run over again by someone's compulsive sexual behavior. Right? So we have a need when we're in that position as a partner to be able to not only figure out about boundaries and how to take care of ourselves, but to take a look at what we want and need out of the relationship. And I suggest the first place they start is, can we rebuild trust? Can we lay a foundation to have trust rebuilt in our marriage? Because if we can't, at some point we might need to take a look at separate recoveries. But if it's possible that we can lay a foundation for trust, what can happen is, I hear a phone going off, and that's on my end. I'm so sorry.
Just ignore it. We're good.
Okay. All right. So what can happen is the coupleship can begin some really rigorous support at the beginning while the woman's going through her treatment process and while the guy is getting his support. If all three of those entities are attended to, there can be some really successful outcomes. So when it comes to male partners, they have a tremendous need for support. One thing that you and I were discussing is, what are the resources out there for them? And one thing that I think both of us are interested in seeing more of is online support groups or forums for these guys. I would like to offer, as you were mentioning earlier, that if there are men who are interested in that right now, we're compiling at Hope Ray Therapy a list of these guys who are interested in some sort of online support, and we're going to survey them to see what would work best. And at some point, hope to have an offering, maybe collaborating with other groups such as yourself and your organization, or whoever else might be interested in offering some hope and healing and support for these dudes, because they really, really need it and they want it, but it's hard to find.
Yeah, it is hard to find. Mm-hmm. I was at an international summit to end sexual exploitation, but there's lots of recovery programs there. That's why we were there. We were there addressing how women are at increased risk of exploitation when they use pornography. we were going around because we're talking about women in recovery, and they're going, but what about the guys? What about the guys? Well, of hundreds and hundreds of us there, most of us are activists in the fight to end exploitation and human trafficking. There was one group that had a group for men, and it was only in their area. We're like, wow, like there's just so little out there. So yeah, as at Real Love Recovery and Women United Recovery, we're looking at getting something going for men.
Cool.
That'll be a fun conversation to have. But
now, I hope to be part of it.
Yeah, I think that would be great. And you're going to give us your email at the end so that any of those men, and I'll make sure to post it with this, so that any of those men who are interested, those male partners, can go ahead and send you an email, let you know they're interested.
That's right. Yep.
That would be great.
It's just for an audible version of that, it's support@hoperaytherapy.com. And like you said, Lacy, you'll be able to post that. I appreciate it because we want to gauge what these guys need before we try and make a resource for them.
Yeah, excellent point. Because, that's like guys making resources for women who are trying to recover, right?
Yeah.
That hasn't really helped.
And it's not always a gender gap. Sometimes it's a matter of not understanding the person by not listening, and I think you must have the same experience in the years that we've been doing this now. You start to really get an understanding and a feel for the common threads, between a lot of the partners, whether male or female. But it is so true that males have some specific concerns specific to their gender. And that's why we wouldn't want to just throw something together willy-nilly without it really having their participation, their input. I think that's so important.
Yeah, I love it. I think it'll be awesome. I look forward to seeing what comes over the next year.
Awesome.
So, okay. And now, Hope, you had mentioned, is there anything else you'd like to tell us about the populations you work with, about the work that you do before we move into getting inside your brain about recovery?
I could just say this, I had a phone call the other day with a woman, and she was calling from a different country and wanted to know, should I work with you or not? And the question she posed to me is, she's a female partner. She said, my husband has a sex addiction and he's in inpatient treatment right now. Is it true that he should just go to inpatient, spend several weeks and months working through his stuff and then eventually come back to us as a family and maybe do a disclosure and maybe help us, heal and see if we can make this marriage work? And I said, well, this is where I differ a little bit, because I do believe, whether the addict is a man or a woman, that their first priority, if they're married or if they have a family, is to the family. And yes, it's important to arrest your behavior so that you can have clear thinking. But the truth is that disclosure and other important family types of situations can be worked on in tandem with doing solid recovery work. And so I might be a little cutting edge on that. There's many folks who disagree with me. They really feel that the person struggling with compulsions needs to just kind of go off into a vacuum for a while, figure themselves out, and then come back into the real world. But I think it's their best bet to leverage the family and all the losses they could potentially lose if they don't incorporate their recovery into their actual life from the get-go. So the work that I do involves rebuilding trust. Disclosure is often a part of that. I offer a disclosure intensive. And really, I just kind of look at it like I'm a specialist in helping folks rebuild trust. The reason I'm sharing that is I want to reiterate, I think that's such an important need. And there are a lot of us out here that do focus on that, not asking you to wait many, many months or even a few years into the process before you can have those relational needs met. So thanks for that opportunity. I just wanted to share that with you.
Yeah, I love that. I love it. And I've seen that too, that while letting the addict go into a vacuum for a while, like you said, can be helpful to them, the family is still left bleeding, and that it's really critical to rebuild that foundation. And it has to be done in tandem, like you said. I've really seen that. So, yeah. So, and maybe that doesn't work for everyone. Maybe it's not necessarily, one way's right, one way's wrong. Maybe it depends on a couple shit. But I certainly have seen more recovery happen for the women I've coached when they're able to recover along with their spouse too. Incredible. So, yeah. Okay. So what would you like to tell us about your process, about your, I'm at a loss for words. I know you wanted to share a little bit of content and some ideas, so why don't we get into that?
Let's brainstorm a little bit here. I think some of the stuff I've been hearing lately would be good for discussion. Lots of partners that I'm talking to, male partners and female partners, are wanting to know, what do they do when they first find out that their spouse has this addiction? And while a lot of male partners sometimes had a hunch of some sort. Same with female partners, but a lot of male partners say, I knew she was a little seductive, or that's something I hear a lot. Do you ever hear that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they aren't caught off guard completely that there's been some infidelities or whatever type of compulsive behavior. But I think most often there's a real sense of fear and kind of shock when they learn, all that there might have been underneath the surface. So I want to ask you a question. I want to ask you, how often do you work with a female who has had long-term secrets from their partner, and he finally finds out the whole big whammy and is so shocked and surprised? How often does that happen?
I don't talk to the men very often. What's usually happened by the time the women get to me is there have been multiple disclosures and stoppings, and they're like, okay, 12-step wasn't working. So by the time they get to me, the husbands are not at all surprised, but they're deeply hurt.
Okay.
And they're really struggling to even know which end is up. Mm-hmm. There's been, I don't remember if we mentioned on this or when we were talking before, but there's been a real attack on their masculinity. Like for men, like they're naturally more territorial. They're like, wow, someone else has been with my wife. I don't even know what to do with that information. Mm-hmm. So by the time I'm working with the women, they've probably been to a few therapists. They've been in and out of recovery. But I don't think that there's certainly by the time they get to me, their husband is not shocked it happened again. Not at all.
And that's why I ask. I wonder if you find this too. A lot of times those men who are partners have all of this intense energy, and it's pain energy is what it is. It's, trauma to some degree, what they're going through. And do you ever find that they want to direct that energy toward the affair partners or toward the source, not so much always toward the woman who's their partner? Have you found that?
Oh yeah, they all of a sudden get their own obsession of some sort, even whether it's like then they're always thinking about the affair partner. And the woman's like, I'm trying not to think about him, and he's thinking about him when we're in bed now, and there's a lot of that happens. There's a lot of all of a sudden he's joined 3 different sports at the local rec center. There's definitely this overabundance of pain energy, like you said, that they are trying to figure out what on earth are they supposed to do with this. Mm-hmm. Because as a culture, we don't give them a healthy outlet. We don't say, hey, by the way, you should feel totally run over right now. Mm-hmm. Like, it would make sense you're feeling kind of crazy. So is that kind of what you're
Yes. And so I guess as we're talking here, one of the things that I feel is really important is to help surround these men with, like you were saying, some really healthy ideas about their situation. That huge, intense anger is actually normal, right? And a lot of times what's happening is they're directing it towards someone who they feel has infringed on their own relationship. But it's hard sometimes to see that their partner and whatever choices she has made really are her own responsibility, despite the fact that there's compulsion, maybe abuse in the past, all sorts of difficult things she's dealing with. It's important for the guys to be able to see that their partner needs to own their own recovery, right? And at that point, what I like to encourage guys to do is think about their strength, because a lot of times they take their strength and they are almost channeling it toward, wanting to fix the situation or wanting to do away with that guy or wanting to end his reputation or whatever. One of the things I think is really possible for these men is to be able to channel their strength into limiting themselves. So instead of expelling it all, finding a way to channel their strength to stay within themselves, to think about what they feel, to seek support, to talk about their feelings versus bursting them out through yelling or fighting or some sort of thing. And I really like to encourage men to think about their strength, because it's one of their biggest assets early on when they first discover this stuff. So bringing that up, my question for everybody is, what has worked out there? And I would love to hear from some of the listeners too, what has worked in those early stages, because a lot of these men don't have a place to turn. And so it kind of unravels at home. I'm sure you've seen that too, right?
Oh yeah, in a big way. Lots of trying to fix people and things. Like lots of home repairs get done after early disclosure.
Right.
The cars get fixed.
I'm curious how long that period lasts for most women. It would be an interesting survey when we're looking at women who are struggling with these compulsions. How do they manage in their relationship, and what kinds of things are helping their spouses when it comes to venting that anger or turning that anger inward? A lot of guys are reported to shut down and different things like that. So that whole partner experience is really, really difficult, and I think we just need more support for them.
Yeah, I agree. So when you do work with male partners, what's some of the advice? So you had mentioned, helping them to channel that intensity, all of that energy by learning to limit themselves. Can you expound more on what that means?
Sure. I think it can be different depending on the situation. I had a guy once who wanted to go into the school and beat the teacher up, who was one of the affair partners, and actually interacted with this person at some school function. And I asked him, what limited you from going and actually pummeling him in the face? And he said, I didn't want to embarrass myself or my wife. And I said, let me ask you this. Do you see that as strong or weak? And he said, well, I felt like, I don't know, what's the word? A ninny muggins. I felt silly, he said. I felt like I wasn't doing what I'm supposed to do as a man. And I said, so at the same time, pummeling him in the face would be tough for your reputation, potentially cost your wife her job. It would be a big problem, right? It could even have some legal ramifications for you. And he said, yeah. I said, so why is that the strong option? And he said, well, technically it would be a stupid option. I said, okay, so let's start to see your strength as coming from your intentional decisions, the areas that you are choosing to go to, or the areas that you're choosing to limit yourself from going to. And so we just started talking about different ways he could use his strength. And so one of the hardest things that required the most strength for him was going to be talking to his wife about how he felt and listening to her check-ins, because we set her up with a really good daily check-in. She was early in recovery, and just sitting there and listening without zoning out or without disengaging was hard for him. And so part of his therapy work was really to build strength in that area. And as he did that, he felt the tension ease on needing to target these other guys and these other external pieces of her story. So that's kind of what I mean about channeling their strength. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's amazing. Absolutely love that. That's really good. Yeah, this is why I'm going to be having a few of my current clients email you, have their husbands email you.
Oh, that would be great.
No, that's amazing. I think that sounds really incredible, really empowering. I remember one husband, his wife was telling me he hadn't really reacted. He hadn't really done or said anything about, it was an emotional affair. It hadn't progressed physically, but it was an emotional affair. And she was like, but you're not even mad. And he's like, you've hurt yourself enough. I don't need to hurt you more. But if you want to know the truth, I thought about walking into his office and shooting him in the head. And just, it was important for her to hear that he was struggling, because up until this point, she hadn't heard that. So I think that's something that's important for these guys to recognize, is it's a blessing to your wife and her recovery to hear that you're upset, that this has been hard for you. And yeah, it's hard for her to hear, but we get to deal with that, right?
They have an amazing capacity for a leadership role, not leading her in recovery, but his leadership role within the relationship can be a huge factor in helping her move forward, giving her, a strong, sturdy place to work through the things she needs to work through. It's not the same when a man is an addict. It's different than when a woman is an addict, if we're talking about a heterosexual relationship here. And the truth is that in general, most men need to feel like they haven't lost their footing as they're as the admired, leadership type of role that they hope for. Doesn't matter if they're the breadwinner or not. It means that a part of their masculinity is really infringed on when there are affairs or any sort of infidelities. And so especially what I find is a lot of male partners are actually very faithful men. They have not tread the waters of infidelity themselves. There are several that have, but in general, what I find is a lot of the men who are married or partnered with somebody with a compulsive sexual issue, a lot of them have not gone off into that territory themselves. And so what's really tough sometimes for them is to not feel like a sucker, right? Because they can't look at themselves and say, well, I guess I did it too. So instead, they just feel like, well, what am I still doing here? But when they ask me that question, I ask it right back. I say, so what are you still doing in the relationship? And they just always, that's when the tears come, and they say, well, I love her, or she's the mother of my children, or we've been together forever. I couldn't just leave, but I don't know what to do. And so they're really caught in that quandary of, what do I do now? I don't know if I could ever get this anger out of me. I don't know if I could ever rebuild trust or a sex life with my partner. I feel scared and out of control. And helping them reestablish their own sense of self-leadership and then leadership within the relationship is a huge factor. Now, when I'm working with female partners, that is less of a goal at first. What we're working on with female partners is being able to find ways to lay a foundation for trust or receive the trust building that he's offering and what to look for, etc. So he's in the leadership role in that capacity again, even if he's the addict. So that's my personal view. I know there's a lot of people who would say that's very conservative and they disagree with it. But the idea is, I've learned over the years that men really need to feel empowered, and they feel like the wind's been sucked out of them, knocked out of them with this stuff. So to help them kind of get full sail again is an important part of them learning what they can do and what they're capable of tolerating to go forward.
I love that. And I love how you talked about the empowerment. So when I work with women, one of our number one goals is to empower her in her own recovery, to empower her as a woman, because a lot of women are seductive because it's the only way they know how to gain power. Mm-hmm. Or they will, they'll go for the teacher or the professor or the whatever, the boss, whatever, because there's that, we joke about it in this psychological world about daddy issues. That's real. And a lot of these women really are looking for that strong role model. Right. And they feel so disempowered that they can't see that in their real lives. So I think it's really fitting that you're talking about empowering their partners when the women themselves also need to learn empowerment. And I think that's one of the big things missing in a lot of these recovery programs is we're not empowering women to use their sexuality in a healthy, productive way. Because as women, we are incredible creators. I mean, we grow life. It doesn't get more creative than that, right? Yeah. It doesn't get more powerful than that. Mm-hmm. So I just love that. And I love the idea of empowering the male partners too.
I echo that. I hear what you're saying. I get it, because that's what I feel in my core is super important to help them grasp for themselves, partners and folks struggling with addiction or compulsion. I want to just share a quick story really fast about a female who had a sex addiction or was in recovery for sex addiction, and she had an issue with exhibiting herself. So really revealing clothing at inappropriate times, or, even at the beach where it's appropriate to be, scantily clad, but going there with intention to feel the absorption of people's stares. And that was what was creating a high for her. And so, we sat frankly and talked together. I said, how are you going to be empowered when your cleavage isn't showing? And she says, oh, it's simple. I'll just wear yoga pants. And I said, okay, so how are you going to feel empowered if you had to wear a big old muumuu, or if you had to wear something that didn't offer any insight to your curvaceous body? And she said, well, frankly, it's really hard for me to feel grounded if I don't feel like I'm drawing attention to myself. And then when I draw attention to myself, I feel even more aware and embarrassed, but it's like a thrill to me. And I said, well, if you were to do the inverse of that, think about how empowering it could be if you are surrounded by some of the coworkers you found attractive. And instead of doing the posture where you bend over and really demonstrate, how good looking you are that day, or instead of being flirtatious with your smile, etc., what if you were to use your power to affirm your own self, or to call your partner and banter with him about some of these things, or to take a picture and send it to him? I mean, we want to start small, right? You don't want to ask somebody to completely wipe out their sexuality, because that makes it feel like it's a forbidden fruit, and it really doesn't lend well to a good recovery. So helping her identify ways to empower herself without having to suck attention from other people. It is so important for women to realize that it's such a potent injection to get the stare of another married man or of a high-powered professor or boss. That is empowering because they aren't supposed to do that, right? It's empowering because they're married to someone else. They're not supposed to be interested in you, or they're your senior, or you're subordinate to them at work, so they're not supposed to be eyeing you. And there's a component of that that's very exhilarating for someone with a love addiction or sex addiction. But to think about, how can you survive without that? And what can you do in place of that? What's the inverse? Instead of going after that, what can you do internally to feel empowered in those situations? That's another way to look at empowerment. So I like this talk about empowerment. It's not always just, I am woman, hear me roar. Sometimes it's more subtle and quiet and introspective. And it's a hard thing to teach.
It's a hard thing to learn.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Yeah. Even those of us who've been at it for a long time, sometimes we're like, whoops, let me try to do that differently next time.
Yeah. And catching ourselves is the biggest part, that mindfulness there. I think you're right on about that.
Yeah. Really powerful.
Yeah.
Awesome. Oh, I love it. Juicy stuff. I can't wait to share this with everybody.
Cool.
Okay, so Hope, we've got a few more minutes. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up and tell everyone how to contact you?
Well, I think if I could share from my heart, it would just be to say, media right now is all over the place. There's a bunch of different camps. There's people who believe in sex addiction, and then there's people who think it's a total hoax. There's people who believe that there's compulsive sexual behavior and love addiction problems, but that those are really just characteristic of someone who's been badly abused, and they really are poor victims, and there's nothing they can do about it. They're just always going to be dating those abusers, or always be cheating on their spouse. And I find that to be terribly stigmatizing and wrong. I think there's a need in our culture right now to identify that, yes, people can struggle with sexual compulsions all the way up to an addiction standpoint, and that it can be treated from an addiction model, but it also is a compassionate model that causes that person to bear responsibility, to make amends, to do what they need to do to uncover where the wounds originate, and also to be able to live comfortably in their own skin without taking advantage of others or themselves. And it can be a beautiful world. So I just want to encourage folks who are in recovery, if you get bogged down by all the stuff that media is saying or disregarding about you, it's real, and the recovery community knows what's up. So stay connected, because that's really important, that you learn the verbiage of recovery and learn, the mantras of self-care, and that you stay connected to people, because that connection is a huge way to learn intimacy and to fill in the holes that all of us have in our hearts. And I think that's what we're looking for with addiction or compulsion. We're looking to fill these holes that weren't filled long ago. And we're looking to inject them with potent injections of, some sort of thrill. But what we learn in recovery is that thrill is so temporary. It's like injecting Botox. It dissolves over time. And that there's ways to inject beautiful, healthy recovery, whole feelings to fill up those empty places. So that is what I would want to share with everybody. I know they get discouraged, and it's important to keep on keeping on.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. That was beautiful. Thank you.
Oh, cool.
This has been amazing. Thank you so much. So, Hope, tell everyone where they can find you. Give us your website. Give us your email address.
Sure. So my website is hoperay.com. It's hope and then ray is ray.com. And if you want to connect with me, there's a form you could submit there. For the guys, especially who are interested in some recovery work or healing work, I want you to email me because we're trying to kind of survey and figure out what these guys need and what the best forum and format would be for them. So I need their help, and I'd be very eager to learn who's interested in this. And then you and I are going to do some collaborating on that. I'm looking forward to it. That email is support@hoperaytherapy.com. And if you email that, then we'll be able to kind of collect some information from you about what your needs are. If you want to learn about my intensives, you'll see on my website that I don't really market for the female sex and love population. Most of my referrals are by word of mouth, and so it's kind of more of an underground community there. So if you need to reach me, you can always email me through my website, and we'll start talking about the opportunities for intensives for females who want to do disclosure or want to rebuild their marriage because they're in advanced recovery but still having trouble.
Awesome. Support@hoperaytherapy.com.
Yeah.
Hey, awesome. Thanks, Hope. This has been fantastic. I hope you've all enjoyed our little chat, and reach out to Hope, especially if you're a male partner of a sex and love addict.
Cool.